Hey there, I'm just a guy having fun at the range. Today we're off the range to work on some dry practice. So let's build those dry practice skills. Once you've mastered the basic manipulations with your firearm in dry practice, you can start to use dry practice to hone some of the other skills involved with marksmanship. Of course, the primary skills that you want to be focusing on in dry practice are going to be your trigger press and other manipulations of your firearm. You can also use dry practice to work on presentation as well as malfunction clearing. Let's work on presenting the firearm from the holster. Begin with the firearm in the holster that you intend to use. Find a target that is in a safe location. For example, I have a cinder block wall along the wall over here, so I know that it's a safe place to point my firearm. I'm going to start by making sure that my firearm is in fact unloaded, and then I'll continue with my dry practice drill. I'm going to go ahead and present to the ready, do a quick chamber check, take out the magazine, make sure that this magazine is empty. Do another chamber check, magazine check. This gun is now unloaded. I'm also going to verify that any other magazines that I have on my person are in fact unloaded. Right? Once I've verified that I have no ammunition on me, I can begin to work on this training. Now for presentation, it doesn't actually matter if there's a magazine in the firearm or not. Unless you have a firearm that doesn't allow you to pull the trigger without a magazine in it. We're going to work on pulling the trigger in a little while, but for now we're just going to work on getting the gun out of the holster and presented to the target. There's a 5-step draw process which I've talked about in other videos. But during dry practice, it's a great opportunity to kind of think through all of those motions, work through them in slow motion, and then start to pick up speed as we start to move from one motion to another more fluidly. So I'm going to begin by thinking through my 5-count draw and doing each motion independently and slowly. Count 1, I'm going to place my support hand on my midsection and I'm going to drive down on my firearm with my firing hand. Right? And as I'm thinking about count 1, I want to be thinking about doing those in sync and quickly. Okay? Then I'm going to move on to count 2. I'm going to wrap my fingers around the grip of the gun and quickly jerk it up out of the holster, just enough for the muzzle to clear the holster. Then I'm going to go to count 3. I'm going to drop my elbow and rotate my firearm downrange. Now this is a great place for me to pause in dry practice and to consider, where is my firearm pointed? At this stage in my draw, my firearm should be pointed roughly at the bullseye on my target. I should be able to look at the line of my slide and say that is about where I want that bullet to go. So that if I were to squeeze off around right now, I would be able to hit my target even though I haven't even fully extended my firearm and I haven't looked at the sights yet. So this is a great place to pause, check my firearm's alignment. Am I pointed down? Am I pointed up? Am I pointed out to the right or left? Or am I lined up with where I want to be? All right? My firearm should still be close to my body at this point. As I move to position 4, I'm going to move my firearm forward across my body and my support hand is going to move out in front of the firearm. This sets up my isometric grip, or my push and my pull. So then as I'm driving the firearm out towards my target, I'm going to keep my eyes on the target and I'm going to move my firearm straight in a line from this retention position where I was pointed at the target straight up so that it is in line with my eye. Got my hands together, pushing it forward, and as I'm pushing forward with my right hand, my left hand is trying to stop that motion, building up that vice grip on it, and as I get to my target, my front sight will enter my line of sight, and I'll be able to bring that rear sight up and right around that front sight. And as I'm driving it out, I'm going to go ahead, place my finger on the trigger, take out the slack, and I should end up at count 5 with my sights aligned on target and my trigger slack taken out. At this point, it's just a little bit of pressure to put a good shot on target. I'm going to go ahead and put my finger straight, and then I'm going to work backwards to reholster. Which will allow me to come back to the body, let my body separate my hands to count 3, and this should be about the same position where I was on the way out. Okay? I'm a little bit higher than I was before, so I'm going to think about maybe I need to come back to my body a little bit lower than where I was just now. Again, great time to check my alignment of my firearm in the retention position up against my target. Am I lined up? Yes, I'm just about lined up there. Then I'm going to go ahead, count 2, push that back towards my holster. This is also a good time. Make sure that my clothing is out of the way. Am I actually lined up where I think I am? And then slowly back into the holster. Right? So now I'm going to start practicing that with a little bit more speed. It's good to think through every single step of that particular process. But as you start to get more and more comfortable with that, you can add a little bit of speed. Start working on getting it into a nice fluid motion. Right? And you can keep working on that. Keep building up speed and then slow it down to check to make sure that you're still hitting all of those points exactly where you want to hit it. But you can do that. Go out, come back in. Oop, come back in. Go out, come back in. Go out, come back in. And that'll help you work on your comfort level with actually presenting to a target, reholstering your firearm. If anything happens, for example, if my shirt comes untucked a little bit, covers over my holster, and I try and put my gun in, you'll notice it hangs on my clothing. Okay? That's a good thing to do during dry practice so that I know what that's going to feel like. So if this is a loaded firearm and I start to put it in, oh, I remember what that felt like during dry practice. I need to pull that back out a little bit, get my shirt out of the way, and then go ahead and try reholstering at that point. This is also a great time to practice carrying in different positions. Okay? Now, if you are required to carry, either because of your job or competition or whatever your reason is, you have to carry a gun in a particular position, go ahead and carry it in that position. Practice your presentation in that position. But if you have the opportunity to say, I want to try what an appendix carry would look like, or a small of the back carry, or maybe I've got a drop leg holster that I can use, or a cross draw, and I want to see what that would look like. Dry practice is a much better way to practice those different holster positions than trying to do it with live fire. Let me demonstrate one particular example of that, where the dry practice will point out issues that you may not have thought of with live fire. And you could get seriously injured because of that. A shoulder holster would typically hold the firearm like this, okay? Pointed to the rear, underneath the arm. Now my draw, if I go ahead and grab that and start to swing my firearm out, well, what did I just muzzle that I would not have necessarily realized that I was about to muzzle as I draw from my shoulder holster? Right there, I'm pointed at my arm. Now, if I'm doing this live fire, it's the first time I've ever worn my shoulder holster and I want to try it out because I feel really cool carrying my firearm in a shoulder holster. I've got a round chambered and I'm about to whip it out on target, and I grab my gun, and as I'm pulling out, I accidentally put my finger on the trigger and I snap a round off, double check to make sure that's unloaded, and I snap a round off right here while it's pointed at my arm. Okay? In live fire, that could be a life-ending and life-changing, if nothing else, event that you really want to avoid. So if you've got a new holster position, try it out. Once you've gotten your presentation down, or you're at least happy with the way that it's going, you can add in a single dry press to your presentation to simulate what that first shot would be like if you're in competition or a self-defense scenario. So we'll begin in a relaxed position, and then in our mental go, or if we have a timer or some cue to begin, we're going to go ahead and work through our presentation. But once we get on target and we've guaranteed that our sights are lined up, we're going to go ahead and squeeze off that round. Now again, verify that you have an unloaded firearm. This is a Glock, so it does not require a magazine to fire. So I don't have to have a magazine in the gun, and that's safer. If you have a firearm where you are required to have a magazine in, if it has a magazine safety, you have to have a magazine in there to squeeze the trigger and get the hammer to fall, make sure, triple check, that your magazine is empty, and any magazine within reach is also empty. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and leave my magazine well completely empty for this particular drill, and I'm going to begin with a presentation to the target, and as I'm driving out to the target, I'm going to go ahead, place my finger on the trigger, take out that slack, so that as soon as I'm on target, I can squeeze off a round. Now hold the trigger to the rear. This is a great time to work on a trigger reset. Reset my action, squeeze another one. Reset my action, squeeze another one. And then I'll go ahead, decide not to shoot, finger goes straight, and I can reholster. So all that I'm doing is adding a couple of dry presses into my presentation cycle. Dry press, reset, reset my trigger, dry press, reset, dry press. Right? Something along those lines. Reset my action, go ahead and come back to my holster. Right? So that will help me work on not only my trigger control, but now the presentation. It will also help you get the muscle memory you need for getting the firearm, getting the sights on target, and then squeezing the trigger without moving those sights off of target. Gets that into one nice fluid motion so that as you get faster, you can put a shot on target significantly faster than you could before. Hope that was helpful. Remember to practice safely. Always make sure there's no ammo in your area and you're always pointing a firearm in a place where you know the bullet is going to stop.